Whether fishermen admit it or not, every fisherman out there sees the effects of the climate crisis every day on the water. Fishing is getting worse every year, and we have to do whatever we can to help. This is why I advocate for renewables, because I'm not just going to sit on the sidelines while our ecosystem collapses.
I want to read you a quote from a City and State article. Another group fighting Empire Wind 1 is the fishing community, which worries about potential harm to fish and other marine life, including whales and other sea creatures. Then it goes on to say a little bit later, but marine scientists counter that there is no conclusive evidence that offshore wind farms harm fish or marine mammals. We've talked about whales in a previous episode, so let's talk about the effects that offshore wind development and the offshore wind farms, once they're online, will have on fishermen. This is Plugging In. I'm Barry Wygel. Welcome to Plugging In, powering our way to a brighter and healthier New York. I'm your host, Barry Wygel. Each episode on this podcast, we will discuss a different topic related to clean energy, explaining complex topics in a way you can understand. Become part of the community as we help to make a brighter and healthier New York.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in, the future of New York is here.
Before we get into today's episode, I have a very quick favor to ask. If you're enjoying this podcast, please give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on and leave a review. It is the #1 way we can grow. Thank you. Joining us on today's episode is Captain Paul Eidman. He is the owner of Reel Therapy, spelled R-E-E-L, which I love, good pun, a fishing guide and charter service. He's also a member of Anglers for Offshore Wind Power, a project of the National Wildlife Federation. Paul, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Great to meet you, Barry.
So, Paul, can you give us a little background on your business and what you do?
Sure. I've been doing this a really long time, so it's a little tricky. I wear a few hats. Basically, a marine environmental consultant. I am the founder of an organization called Menhaden Defenders, which is a conservation organization that focuses on the exploitation of Atlantic menhaden. Around here, we call them bunker. Up north, they call them pogies. Basically, it's a little forage fish that's ground up for fish meal, for salmon fish farms, and for a cheap, non-sustainable source of protein in cat and dog food. I'm also as you mentioned, I am the outreach leader for Anglers for Offshore Wind Power, and we advocate for renewable energy, and our focus is on the responsible development of offshore wind and work with the public to answer questions and get the real facts out there. As you mentioned, the name of my boat is Reel Therapy, R-E-E-L, and I've been a local fly and light tackle fishing guide for almost 30 years now. And we do catch and release sport fishing for striped bass, bluefish, false albacore, bonito, and more.
So there's certainly a lot of headlines that say fishermen are uniformly opposed to offshore wind power. Even just the name of your group was surprising that it even exists. So we definitely want to dive into this a little bit more. And I'll admit that fishing is something I don't know much about, so I'm going to ask some basic questions. The offshore wind farms that are under development along the East Coast, they're pretty far out to sea. Are people fishing out that far?
It's a great question, and I think I know enough about fishing for the both of us, so I got you covered there. Okay.
Excellent.
So yes, some fishermen do, although the majority of recreational fishermen stay pretty much within 5 miles of the shoreline. The larger boat, the offshore guys, as we call them, that pursue tuna and billfish and stuff, will probably travel through the wind farms to get through over to their tuna grounds, which are way far off. I also expect that once the turbines are up and running, it's going to become a new recreational fishing destination. So folks are going to have to buy more tackle and bigger boats. I also anticipate that the local party boat fleets will also take advantage of these new hotspots, and they'll be doing everything from bottom fishing for black sea bass, bluefish, as well as running boat tours of the wind farms.
Yeah, I never even thought of the recreational aspect of the offshore wind farms as another economic advantage of these projects.
The nearest wind farm to us here at Sandy Hook, New Jersey, will be the Empire One wind area. And that's about 17 miles off from Sandy Hook and about 15 miles from Jones Beach, New York. And we are really looking forward to having 54 towers to fish on.
Now, this is something new in America. It's been done overseas, but it makes sense that there would be questions or concerns raised as we embark on this totally new endeavor out in the ocean. Were there concerns for you initially when you heard about offshore wind power?
I'm kind of a renewable energy geek at heart. So the first time I heard of it was a team of Rutgers scientists came to a fishing club, and this is years ago, and they were talking about this Google wind farm that was going to happen off the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. And I was intrigued. Of course, nobody knew anything about it. And before you know it, here I am advocating for it. But I was not afraid. There was no knowledge. This is brand new. Obviously you go on Google and you start looking up wind farms, and it's all about Europe, because they're 30 years ahead of us. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
And we've done previous podcast episodes explaining that these are not popping up willy-nilly. You can't just go out and shove some turbines in the ocean. So how has your outreach or collaboration been with regulators? Does the fisherman community work together with the regulators to make sure that these will be mutually beneficial?
It's important to compartmentalize your question and not blend the fishing community. So you have recreational fishermen, you have commercial fishermen, and then you have commercial fishermen that use mobile gear like trawling and purse seining and bottom dredging. And they are the main opponents of offshore wind. Obviously, if you're towing an extremely heavy clam dredge, you're not going to want to get too close to the rock structure down below. They just really want to just, quote, mow the lawn back and forth without interruption. And that's really their biggest concern about the wind farms, is it's interrupting their tows. Taking that a step further, some of the concerns have been fabricated in an effort to stop or stall offshore wind development. So I focus personally on the science behind it all. And I will replace your word industry with developers or offshore wind developers, because that's how we refer to them. And the developers have all been transparent as possible and encourage interaction with the fishing community. The commercial fishermen have, in fact, taken advantage of this, and they're at the table all the time. The recreational guys have not caught on yet, and they have chosen to use the internet as their source of information, which, as you know, is tricky because there's a lot of mis and disinformation out there. Each developer has what we call fishery liaison people that their job is to interact with the fishing community. And their phone numbers and email addresses and everything are right on these websites, as well as vessel advisements and all type of work out at sea. So if you're a responsible boater, you owe it to yourself. If you're going to be going to one of these offshore wind areas, you could just look it up and see what's going on. Since all of the offshore wind that we're doing is in federal, not state waters, it's federally regulated by something called BOEM, BOEM. That stands for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And they basically act as the landlord that manages the EEZ, which is the exclusive economic zone, from 3 miles offshore to 200. So they're the landlord. They're the ones that lease out all the WEAs, that's wind energy areas, and collect the data and reports from the offshore wind developers. And then on top of that, I should say under that, you have NOAA, NOAA, and NMFS, NMFS, National Marine Fisheries Service, as well, and they focus more on the regulatory side of things. So both of these bureaus are actively engaged and have assigned people to offshore wind, and they also have very detailed websites with all kinds of information that's valuable to the fishing community.
And so you've written a number of blogs that people can read on the Anglers for Offshore Wind Power website, and they're all very optimistic about this, which is good, and they answer a lot of questions. So I want to talk about the potential benefits, or the benefits that are coming for recreational fishing and for the fish themselves. So you talk about the blue and yellowfin tuna, mahi-mahi. What's going to happen, or what are the potential benefits to these actual fish once these turbines are up?
I guess my blogs are optimistic because offshore wind to me is exciting And contrary to popular opinion, or internet opinion, I should say, in politics, offshore wind offers us an immediate solution to clean up our act. The fact is that fishing can coexist with offshore wind, and it will be extremely beneficial to both the health of the ocean and the creatures in it. Folks really need to understand that polluting the air that we breathe by burning fossil fuels has a direct impact on the health of the ocean. And we need to do whatever we can to burn less and use renewable energy to replace it and stall the effects of pollution and the climate crisis that is, in fact, ruining our fishing. Offshore wind is what we have right now at our fingertips, and it's going to produce massive amounts of clean energy so that we can breathe easier and catch more fish. So specifically to answer your question, I was speaking about the artificial reef system that would develop in the offshore wind energy areas. Much of the focus in the conversations about offshore wind is on the bottom, okay? But this comment specifically, meaning the mahi-mahi comment, specifically refers to the fact that the entire length of the tower in the water column will attract bait fish, and there'll be current breaks that occur. So depending on the season, anglers can travel to target whatever species they want. And mahi-mahi and Atlantic bonito and false albacore, for example, in our area, that's a late summer thing. So we're going to go out there and we're going to cast. They are located, by the way, in the upper third of the water column, closer to the surface. So these bait fish that gather in the current or the current break will be preyed upon by not only fish, but birds and everything else. So we would cast on the down current side of these towers to catch the fish. Now, it's important to understand, I know you're not a fish guy, but right now we get excited over a coffee cup. If we see something floating out there, we cast at it because it attracts the little bait fish, and then obviously the game fish are below it. So it's like a magnet. So you can imagine what a 30-foot wide tower is going to attract. It's going to be a major fish magnet. So yeah, so right now we're fishing around lobster buoys or anything floating in the water, and a tower is going to be an incredible piece of fish holding structure. So to get into the weeds in that a little bit, so each tower gets driven into the seafloor, and then around the base, the developers add large rocks to prevent the ocean currents from scouring out or moving the sand and things around the bottom to make sure that the tower stays secure. So almost immediately, microorganisms and mussels and everything stick to the rocks, and that's when the birth of the reef begins. And then this begins to attract all kinds of creatures and in turn, all types of game fish. We saw this up in Block Island literally 2 months after the towers were in. People were fishing it and banging away at all kinds of fish.
Have you been out to fish at the South Fork Wind Farm yet?
That's way too new. I have taken groups of people up to Rhode Island to go see the turbine and to fish them. I have to say that it was an incredible experience. We caught an incredible number of fish. The blades of the turbine were spinning about 95 feet above us, and the water below us was about 90 feet deep. We went after summer flounder, what we call fluke, and black sea bass. And you should know that at other times of the year, there's more game fish than that. There's open access to the towers as long as you don't tie up to them. That's really the only rule. Fishermen are fully able to cast and work the structure beneath it.
So as you mentioned, there is a very vocal minority of people that are opposed to this, and they use fishermen as the prime example of people that are going to be hurt by these projects. You're explaining to me how a lot of that is not true. So what do you think needs to be done, other than podcasts like this, to communicate the benefits or to combat the mis and disinformation that's out there?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah, can you solve all these problems, please, right now?
Yeah, I'll
30 seconds.
Get out my little fishing magic wand and off we go. One of the things that I would suggest would be to reconfirm why we're doing this and what the actual mission behind offshore wind is and why we're implementing it and why it's happening so fast. So from my perspective as a fisherman, whether fishermen admit it or not, every fisherman out there sees the effects of the climate crisis every day on the water. Fishing is getting worse every year, and we have to do whatever we can to help. And this is why I advocate for renewables, because I'm not just going to sit on the sidelines while our ecosystem collapses. Making the connection, I think, is critical for fishermen to understand that the natural gas and other fossil fuels that are currently powering our homes is directly related to this. The pollution from this pollutes our air, and it ultimately falls in the ocean. So the burning of fossil fuels for electricity creates excess carbon dioxide that, in addition to adding greenhouse gas effect, is deposited in our oceans, and it makes them more acidic. And we've all heard the term acid rain. Well, increased acidity is altering our marine ecosystems and creatures in ways that we can't really see. But years of scientific research has given us a very clear understanding of what's going on, and it's not good. So acidity erodes calcium carbonate. Not to get too geeky on you, but that's the very foundation of almost every marine creature. So corals, they provide habitat. The ear bones inside our game fish are composed of calcium carbonate. So when you increase the acidification, it alters these bones and affects the fish's sense of smell, sense of direction, and hearing. Shellfish are also composed of calcium carbonate. So scallops, clams, mussels, oysters are experiencing softer shells because of this acidification. The molting cycles of crabs and lobsters are also being altered and slowed down. So some forms of plankton are also have structures composed of calcium carbonate, and they are seeing changes to their survival growth and physiology. So in short, acidification has a drastic effect on the entire marine food web, including the game fish that we all love to catch. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we have all these large plants right in our estuaries that have saltwater intakes. And literally, they are positioned in all the key nursery areas for a game fish, like weakfish or summer flounder, bluefish, striped bass. And even you have forage fish like alewife and blueback herring and menhaden, of course, and eels. Well, our game fish rely on these. So when you have all these plants that are sucking it in, they literally kill over 70 million fish in the intakes. And offshore wind would replace these plants. And that to me is just incredible. And thankfully, rapid advances in offshore wind turbines over the last 10 years have drastically improved capacity. They've offered now a cost-effective, large-scale alternative to fossil fuels. And believe it or not, offshore wind turbines along the United States shorelines can produce nearly 2 times the current amount of electricity our country uses today.
Yeah, you pretty much summed up our mission statement, so that was excellent. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Given the divide in our country right now, it's really important for us all to just be much more open-minded and not just dismiss thoughts of one another. It's imperative because there's a real lot of science behind this, and we wouldn't be investing all these billions of dollars in a technology if it was going to harm things. We're here to improve things, and we've really screwed the ecosystem up as humans, and we got to do whatever we can to improve things.
Well, I greatly appreciate your perspective, your time, and you're obviously well versed on this subject. So thank you so much for sharing it with our audience.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Plugging In. I hope you learned something, and I hope you share this knowledge with someone else. It would be incredibly helpful if you leave us a 5-star review wherever you found this podcast. If there's a topic you would like us to cover in the future, or have a question about clean energy, send us an email at podcast@aceny.org. You can follow us on social media using the links in the show notes, or consider joining our Clean Energy Supporters mailing list at aceny.org/support. Your support is crucial to creating a brighter and healthier New York. I'll see you next time.
As the sun crests on the horizon, a new day dawns in our state. A new hope for tomorrow is rising, a clean future we create. Tomorrow we breathe easier, tomorrow the skies are clear. Today we are plugging in.